No one expected the moment to feel this heavy. Not the crew, not the director, not even Jamie himself. But as he stood alone at the edge of the dimly lit soundstage, watching Dakota Johnson gather her things for the final time, something inside him tightened painfully. A quiet, devastating realization that this was the end of a chapter neither of them was truly ready to close. The set was unusually quiet. People whispered instead of talking. Footsteps softened themselves. Even the flickering overhead lights seemed to dim out of respect. Everyone sensed it. Something unspoken was happening between the two actors who had once carried an entire cinematic universe on their shoulders. Jamie watched Dakota laugh softly with the makeup artist, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It was a familiar gesture, one he had seen hundreds of times, on set, off set, during interviews, while preparing for scenes that demanded everything from them emotionally. And somehow, tonight, that simple motion felt like an arrow straight to his chest. He wasn't ready. But she was leaving anyway. The farewell wasn't because of conflict. It wasn't because they stopped getting along. It was because life had finally pulled them in different directions, and this time, neither could pretend it wasn't happening. Dakota was stepping into a new role in another country. Jamie had commitments that dragged him to the opposite side of the world. Their schedules, once intertwined, now split open, carving two separate paths out of what once felt unbreakable. Rumors, scandals, headlines, they hadn't helped either. Every whisper about their chemistry, every accusation that blurred the line between acting and reality, all of it chipped away at the freedom they used to share. The world watched them too closely, judged too harshly, imagined too much. And because of that, this quiet goodbye had to be their last. Dakota noticed Jamie standing on the far edge. Her smile faded into something soft, something fragile. She excused herself and walked toward him slowly, her footsteps echoing in the room like a countdown. When she reached him, she didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, really looked, as if memorizing the details of his face, the same face she had worked beside through fear, exhaustion, laughter, embarrassment, heartbreak, and triumph. Jamie forced a small smile. "You're really leaving," he said, though it sounded more like a question he didn't want answered. Dakota nodded. "It's time." "Yeah," he said, eyes lowering. "I know." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything unsaid. They both knew what they meant to each other. Not romantically, not scandalously, but deeply. More deeply than the world could ever understand. Their years together weren't just movies. They were shared fears before intimate scenes. Shared victories after difficult takes. Shared jokes in the dead of night when both were too exhausted to stand. They built something rare. A connection built not on fantasy, but on trust. Jamie exhaled slowly. "It's funny," he whispered, "I thought I'd be prepared for this. But standing here now, it feels like losing something I'll never get again." Dakota swallowed hard, emotion flickering dangerously in her eyes. "You won't lose it," she said. "We just won't have this anymore." "This," he repeated softly, as if the word itself hurt. "This was everything, wasn't it?" Dakota nodded, tears forming but not falling. "Yeah, it was." She took a step closer, their distance narrowing to a few inches. The kind of closeness that once felt natural, but now felt final. "Do you remember the first day?" she asked quietly. Jamie smiled faintly. "You dropped your script. And you picked it up for me, but then accidentally stepped on it." He laughed, a gentle, broken sound. "You never let me forget that." "It was the moment I realized you were human," she whispered. "Not the actor the world sees. Just Jamie." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him cracked. Dakota's eyes softened, shimmering under the studio lights. "What are you thinking right now?" she asked, not as co-stars, not as colleagues, but as two people who once trusted each other with the most vulnerable parts of themselves. Jamie drew in a steadying breath, knowing this was his only chance. His last moment to leave her with words he had carried for years but never spoken fully. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, voice cracking, "that I never said thank you the way you deserved." Dakota blinked, stunned. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself," he continued. "For pulling me through scenes I thought I'd drown in. For being the one person on those sets who saw me, really saw me." Her lips trembled. She didn't interrupt. Jamie's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I'm sorry, for the times the world made our connection harder than it needed to be." A tear rolled down Dakota's cheek at last. He stepped back slightly, forcing himself to breathe through the ache. Those were the words he had held inside for years, the ones he needed to give her before she walked away, before this bond shifted into memory. But he wasn't finished. Behind them, someone whispered, "This is it." And it was. Jamie gathered every emotion that threatened to break him, and prepared to speak the final words he had saved for her, the words that would haunt the crew member who overheard them and leave Dakota standing in tears long after he walked away. Dakota didn't breathe. She stood perfectly still, waiting, knowing Jamie wasn't finished, knowing the words he was about to say would be carved into both of them forever. The soundstage felt like it had stopped existing. The rest of the world felt distant, blurred, irrelevant. Only the two of them remained. Jamie swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "I don't know how to say goodbye to something that changed my life," he whispered. Dakota's lips parted, but no sound came out. He continued, his voice trembling now. "You were the person who stood with me in my most vulnerable moments. You saw me at my worst, at my weakest, at my most afraid. And you never judged me. You just stayed." Dakota's eyes filled again, her breath shaking in her chest. Jamie looked down, trying to collect himself. "Every time things got too heavy, you brought me back. You reminded me why I loved this work. You reminded me that being human, being flawed, wasn't something to hide." Dakota stepped closer, her voice fragile. "Jamie?" But he shook his head gently, asking her to let him finish. "You were my safe place on set," he said. "My anchor when the pressure got too loud. And..." He inhaled sharply, his voice breaking. "I'm terrified of what it means to not have you there anymore." The confession landed between them with devastating weight. Dakota's shoulders trembled. For years, people had twisted their connection into scandal, into gossip, into something messy and unreal. But in this moment, stripped of cameras and scripts and expectations, it was something simple and painfully genuine. Two souls who had shared an extraordinary journey, and were now being torn apart by life's unstoppable tide. Dakota reached out, fingers barely brushing his hand. "You'll be okay," she whispered, though even she didn't sound convinced. Jamie looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had steadied him through storms, through scenes that demanded truth he didn't know he had. "I don't want to forget this," he said softly. "I don't want to forget what we were, what we are." Dakota's tears fell freely now. "You won't," she promised. "Some connections don't disappear just because life changes." He wanted to believe that. He needed to. But goodbye still hung in the air like a blade. The crew pretended not to watch, though every heart on that soundstage knew they were witnessing something rare, not romance, not scandal, but the grief of two people who had become family in a way no one else could understand. Jamie exhaled shakily. "I need you to know," he began again, voice low, raw, "that no matter what the world said about us, no matter the rumors, the headlines, the lies, I have never regretted a single moment I shared with you." Dakota pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying herself. "I haven't either," she whispered. He took one last step toward her. They were close enough now that their breaths mingled, close enough that if one of them moved even an inch, the world might misinterpret everything again. But this moment wasn't for the world. It was for them. Jamie's final words came out in a broken whisper, quiet enough that only she could hear, but loud enough that the memory would echo in them for years. "Thank you for giving me a part of my life I'll never find again." Dakota closed her eyes, tears streaming. "Jamie," her voice cracked, "don't say it like this. It sounds too final." He smiled sadly. "Maybe it is." She shook her head, a soft sob escaping. "I don't want this to be the last version of us." He reached up, gently brushing away a tear from her cheek, a gesture he'd done countless times in scenes, but never like this, never with such sincerity. "This isn't the end of us," he murmured. "It's just the end of what we were." For a moment, neither moved. It felt like time held them there, suspended between goodbye and holding on. Then the director called out gently, breaking the spell. "We need to close the set." Dakota stepped back, wiping her face. Jamie's hand fell to his side, fingers curling as if letting go physically helped him let go emotionally. She turned to leave, but after a few steps, she looked back at him one last time, a look filled with gratitude, heartbreak, and something almost sacred. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "Please." Jamie nodded, voice lost. He watched her walk away until she disappeared behind the curtains, leaving behind only silence and the faintest trace of her perfume lingering in the air. A member of the crew standing nearby later said, "I've never seen two people say goodbye like that. It felt like something holy broke." Jamie stood alone under the fading lights, tears silently rolling down his cheeks, knowing fully that he had just spoken the final words to someone who had shaped him more deeply than he had ever admitted. And as he walked off the set, he carried those last moments like a weight, and a gift. Something ended that night. But something unforgettable remained.